Chapter 3. The Aftermath. We packed up all of her clothes and personal belongings, the things Felix didn't want to keep, along with all of her beautiful toll paintings, needlepoints, quilts, and stuffed animals. We packed it all up and put it in a U-Haul and took it back to New Mexico. It took us some time to go through everything. I kept her makeup, hair accessories, fingernail polishes, and perfumes, and I use them every now and then. Somehow it makes me feel a little closer to her. She had so many clothes, though we couldn't keep them all. She probably never threw anything away. We kept the special things, the things we thought we could use. And although Mom doesn't know if she can ever bring herself to wear any of it, I wear LaDawn's clothes proudly, in her memory. We donated the rest so that someone else could make use of it. But it was so hard just dropping it off, dumping it, as if it didn't matter. I came home and cried, just knowing that some stranger would be going through it all, taking what they want and never knowing what it meant to her. God, I miss her. The months that followed were the hardest ones of my life. I came closer to a complete, total breakdown than I ever have before. Trying to put myself back together was like trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle with a giant piece that was missing. Nothing seemed to fit. Nothing really seemed to matter anymore. Not like it used to. There were many times where I came close to losing it altogether, and it is even more apparent to me now, reflecting back upon it. The problems Sid and I had been having prior to LaDawn's death all seemed so menial now. So together we discovered what was really important, that true love never dies, and we used what we learned through this tragedy to help strengthen our relationship. I honestly don't know if I could have made it through it all without the support and complete understanding of my husband, in whose loving arms I found solace whenever I just needed to break down and cry. But at times it wasn't easy because there were still issues to deal with. March 8th, 1996. Dear LaDawn, I hardly know what to do anymore. Everything is so confusing right now. Sid wants me and the kids to move back in with him, but I'm so scared. I can't deal with him drinking. He gets so mean. I have never felt so depressed, so devastated. I still can't believe that you're gone. Life will never be the same again. Nothing is the same. When I got that phone call, my entire world started to crumble. Everything around me seems to be falling to pieces still. What next? God, I'm afraid to ask. I don't know how much more I can handle. I'm actually beginning to understand why some people contemplate suicide, although I know I could never do it. I have 3 beautiful children that make life worth living. I am so thankful for that. I know they need me, and I want to watch them grow and have kids of their own. If I had nothing else in this life to live for, I would live for them. I worry about Mom, though. Your death has also brought her as far down as I have ever seen her. She is not herself. But I suppose I am not myself either. I love you and miss you so. Your sister, Danelle. Death really puts things into perspective. What's important and what's not. Life really wasn't the same anymore. I couldn't explain it, but it just didn't have the same meaning. I went back to school and tried to pretend that I was all right. I needed to go get my mind off of her, but I couldn't. It didn't work. LaDawn never left my thoughts. I did a lot of writing during this time, mostly in notebooks, and found it to be very helpful. I wanted to talk about her. I needed to. Somehow it helped me to share things with anyone who would listen. My friends at school, the stranger in the grocery store, people at the bank. LaDawn was with me everywhere. Mom, in contrast, found it easier just not to talk about her. In fact, for a very long time, she didn't talk about much of anything at all. She went to work, spoiled her kitties, and did her crafts, sometimes using LaDawn's stuff, but not really talking much, and not at all, about LaDawn. I tried to be patient and considerate of Mom's feelings when I spoke about LaDawn. I never pressed her. We all have our own way of dealing with grief, I suppose, and who's to say what's right or wrong? What works for one may not work for another, so we each just have to deal with things in our own way, in our own time. Chapter 4, Finding Faith. I've always done my best to see the positive side to every experience that life has handed me. And believe me, I've had my share of ups and downs. And I trust that I have learned a valuable lesson from every one of them. Somehow, though, I failed to find anything positive about LaDawn's death. All it really taught me was how truly fragile life is, and how unpredictable, and that we should treasure it to the end, and be thankful for each day. I find myself wondering a lot more about life now, about why we are here, and what we are supposed to do. If there really is even a purpose to life, or if we simply exist for God's enjoyment. Are we supposed to accomplish something here on earth, or just appreciate it while it lasts? I questioned at times how God could do this, or how he could even allow it to happen. To take a young mother away from her 2 little children like that, it just wasn't right. But through all this, my faith did get stronger. I have come to realize that God didn't do it, and he must allow it, because death is a part of life. It must be. And that is why we are here, to experience life. So I accepted it as it was, and my faith continued to grow, and my questions were eventually answered in a subtle way throughout the years. I came to the conclusion that for the most part, God does not intervene. He watches, and perhaps even prepares the way for us now and then. But when it comes to matters of life and death, God simply does not intercede, unless, of course, an individual has some extraordinary mission to fulfill. Yes, even the good die young sometimes. Maybe it would just be too difficult for God to try to save everybody that was worthy of saving. Or maybe he figured we would learn more by simply letting nature take its course. Death, after all, does not discriminate. Learning to deal with it does make us stronger. It could also be that death is not such an awful thing, especially when it comes naturally, and maybe even, just maybe, God takes the good specifically to free them from this world of pain. Whatever the reason, life is what it is. And things happen because of circumstance. Cause and effect. It's God's way of making the world go around. And I have learned that we do not control circumstance. It was circumstance, a bad marriage that my mother happened to be in at the time, that led LaDawn to the streets at the age of 13. And compelled her to experiment with drugs, alcohol, and sex. And it was this rebellion which led to her going to live with my dad in California. It was these circumstances that led her to a lifestyle that would ultimately destroy her. Years of drinking, taking drugs, and abusing her body. We didn't see each other for 5 years after that. And when we met again, she was not at all the LaDawn I remembered. She told me she'd had a few abortions, much to my horror. It was strange how nonchalant she seemed about it all. It was also circumstance, my father marrying a girl LaDawn's age, that caused her to leave our dad's house when she was just 18. I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was about 1 week before my first son was born, in May of 1983. I got a phone call from LaDawn. She said that Dad had thrown her out of the house because she couldn't get along with Beth, his new girlfriend. I couldn't believe it at first, but when I got a hold of Dad, he verified everything. He said he didn't even want to discuss it. As far as he was concerned, he only had one daughter now. Well, in defense of my sister, I said that if he really felt that way, then he didn't have any daughters, because LaDawn was equally as much a part of him as I was. And although we continued talking for a while, the conversation ended when he asked if I would wait to call him at work to tell him when my baby was being born, because Beth didn't like being reminded that he was going to be a grandfather. This hurt, because this was going to be his first grandson, and I had hoped that he would be delighted to hear the news whenever it arrived. I made up my mind right then that I wasn't even going to bother calling him when the baby was born. And I didn't. It was circumstance that forced me to speak with him about a month after Brian was born. Mom was talking to him about LaDawn's car insurance when I happened to walk into her office. I heard her ask if he would like to talk to me, and then heard her say, well, here she is anyway. Begrudgingly, I took the phone and told him he had a grandson. A boy, huh? Well, was his only response. And after a moment of silence, I just handed the phone back to my mom, having received the confirmation I needed that my dad really didn't care anymore, and I would let it go. I wrote to him a few times in the years to follow, but never got a response. I did, however, make it a point to stay in touch with my grandma, his mom, and continued to let her know that I was always open to hearing from him. He was still my dad, after all, even if he had lost his mind for a while. I divorced, remarried, had 2 more children, and divorced and remarried again, all without him even knowing. It was circumstance, too, that brought LaDawn and I back together with my dad after 12 long years. He and Beth had filed for divorce, and he was going through some difficult times. He called my mom for help one night, and while he was on the phone with her, the police came to his door and arrested him. Apparently, Beth was accusing him of making harassing phone calls to her and had him arrested. New York, it seemed, sided with mothers in a divorce, and Beth was taking full advantage of that. My mom heard everything as she was left hanging on the phone, and then she called me. That night turned my life upside down. LaDawn and I spent hours on the phone, talking about what to do. Mom had a little money, and I had just gotten my student loan check. And LaDawn said she could come up with some, but Felix didn't want her to do anything for Dad because of the way he had treated her. She was still hurt by the things he had done, and so was I, but he was our father, and we loved him, so ultimately we decided that we were going to do whatever we could to help him. Sid and I got in an awful fight after that call. He had been drinking quite a bit of beer while I was on the phone and got upset about the conversation. Things just went from bad to worse the minute I hung up. The next day, we decided to split up. He moved out and rented a small house in town, and I moved in with my mom again. We let our mobile home get repossessed. I put my horses on some friends' land and trusted them to care for them. They ended up being terribly neglected, and everything else just seemed to fall apart at the seams. It was only a few weeks later that I got that horrible phone call at school. Once again, circumstance had placed me in a situation that I had absolutely no control over. A situation that I definitely did not want to be in. And I was put on the longest emotional roller coaster of my entire life. I was definitely not prepared for this. I don't know that you ever can be. It's hard to lose someone, even when you expect it, and it always hurts. But this was harder than anything I had ever been through before. I still feel LaDawn's presence, but I know she is gone. We are here, and she no longer is. We watched her body deteriorate. But as things shut down, there was another part of her that seemed to leave long before her last breath. So, is this physical world all there is? I emphatically think not. I feel so much more around me than the physical things I see. There is an energy, not physical, but very strong and very real. So the question then becomes, where do we go from here? If LaDawn is really as close as I think, then is there truly a heaven? How can she be both there and here? I know what I know in my heart. The only thing I don't know is how to make it sound rational. For eons, people have wondered whether a part of us goes on existing after death of the physical body or not. They have imagined a spiritual plane. And for centuries, at least, man's imaginings have become reality. It only makes sense to believe that we, as human beings, have some kind of insight that we are not even aware of. Maybe that insight comes from God. One thing that I have realized in recent years is that I am still learning every day. This life never ceases to amaze me. We never do and never will know it all. We can't. No matter how much we learn, this earth simply holds too many mysteries. The universe, too much magic. There is simply too much knowledge out there for any one person to hope to learn in a lifetime. All we can do is soak up as much as possible while we are here and enjoy life while we can, because it is often too short and much too fragile. I most definitely believe in a greater power. Whether you want to call it God or not doesn't really matter to me. I've never been one for classifications or labels. It is merely one of the many mysteries of life, how the forces of nature, or fate, if you will, works. But no matter how you refer to it, if you always remain willing to learn from it, you will benefit from it in the end. 1 month after LaDon's death, it was also circumstance. My dad's job relocating him from New York to Arlington, Texas, that gave us all the opportunity for a fresh start. My mom, looking desperately for a change in scenery and needing some diversion, decided to follow my dad to Texas. She and her husband, Al, owned their own construction company, and New Mexico had done nothing for it. She asked me to help them move, so I could have the opportunity to look it over for myself. And even though I had previously looked in the atlas, only weeks before, at the maze of roads surrounding the metroplex known as Dallas-Fort Worth, and told her, "Gee, I'm really going to miss you, Mom," because I never could have imagined living in the middle of that mess. It took me only 1 week to fall in love with the small town of Mansfield, located just below that maze of roads. Sid agreed to come with me, although certain he was going to hate it. And it took only 1 week for him as well to fall in love with the beauty of the landscape. It was green and gorgeous, and it was warm. Oh, so warm. We were finally home. I could feel it in my heart. August 20th, 1996. Dear LaDon, as I sit here tonight in Texas, exhausted from our move, all I can do is think about you. You were probably laughing hysterically when Sid's car came off the tow dolly in the mountains of Ruidoso, New Mexico, 2 hours into our trip, because he forgot to hook up the safety chains, without us even knowing. We had to backtrack an hour and a half to find it. It had rolled down a hillside, through a chain-link fence, and under the top rail, smashing the roof, finally coming to rest on a stump which took out the oil pan. It was otherwise intact, except that someone had stolen everything out of it by the time we got back there. I was so upset that all of your fingernail stuff was gone. Nothing else really mattered to me. It's been almost 8 months, yet it seems like just yesterday. At the same time, it doesn't seem real. You're not gone. You can't be gone. How can you be gone? I still feel you all the time. And so does Casey. She told me as we were driving down the road the other day that you touched her arm. I was a little surprised because you hadn't been the topic of the conversation at that moment. In fact, as I recall, we were singing when all of a sudden she got quiet and then exclaimed from the back seat, "Mom, Aunt LaDon just reached down and touched my arm." I know 5-year-olds can have active imaginations, but where did that come from if it wasn't you? It must have been you. I have no reason to doubt her. I should be tired after driving 21 straight hours with the kids, the dogs, the cats, the parrot, and the iguana. All in the Suburban. Lord knows the horses were never so happy to get out of that trailer and see the long green grass in the pasture. But I'm not tired. My mind is reeling. I think you would like it here. Mansfield is a pretty little town. We're on 5 acres, and the house is beautiful. Too bad it's just a rental. A little old lady owns it, and she doesn't want to live in it, but she doesn't want to sell it either. She says we can stay here as long as we want. Maybe in a couple of years our credit will be good enough to qualify for a home loan. She'd probably sell if we had cash. Well, I do feel at home here, for now at least. I guess I'm going to try to get some sleep now. I'm sure I'll see you in my dreams. Love, Denny. The first 6 chapters can be read for free as a sample on Amazon.com/Kindle, and just search either my name, Danelle B. Tyon, or A Letter to Heaven. It's one of the first ones that comes up. And just click on Get a Free Sample. I thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. God bless.